Okay, so let's start. So don't cling to things, endowment effect. नाम से समझ में आ रहा है कि लाइक हम लोग किसी किसी चीज़ पे क्लिंग ऑन कर जाते हैं. मतलब सपोज सपोज हम लोग जैसे देखते हैं उसके बाद बताता. BMW gleamed in the parking lot of the used car dealership. Although it had a few miles on the odometer, it looked in perfect conditions. I know a little about used cars, and to me, it was worth around 40,000. However, the salesman was pushing for 50,000 and wouldn't budge a dime. When he called the next week to say he would accept 40,000 after all, I went for it. The next day, I took it out for a spin and stopped at a gas station. The owner came out to admire the car and proceeded to offer me 53,000 in cash on the spot. Okay, I politely declined. Only on the way home did I realize how ridiculous I was to have said no. Something that I considered worth 40,000 had passed into my possession and suddenly taken on a value of more than 53,000. If I were thinking purely rationally, I would have sold the car immediately, but alas, I had fallen for the influence of endowment effect. We consider things to be more valuable the moment we owe them. ठीक है. In other words, if we are selling something, we charge more for it than we ourselves would be willing to spend. तो सिंपल सा चीज़ है कि हम लोग सपोज किसी चीज़ को ओन करते हैं. ठीक है. तो वी गेट अटैच्ड एक तरीके से उससे. तो हम लोग जब सेल करेंगे तो हम लोग ऑलवेज हायर वैल्यू चार्ज करना चाहेंगे, या फिर हम लोग रैशनली पूरा थिंक नहीं करते. ठीक है. अगर ये रैशनली थिंक करता तो द ऑथर वुड हैव सोल्ड द कार इमीडिएटली, बिकॉज उसके मन में तो 40,000 का था. अब कोई 53 ऑफर कर रहा था, उसको बेच देना चाहिए था. बट दिस इज द एंडोमेंट इफेक्ट जो उसके अंदर था. ठीक है. उसके बाद फिर टू प्रूव दिस, इस चीज़ को प्रूव करने के लिए साइकोलॉजिस्ट डैन एरली conducted the following experiment. In one of his class, he raffled tickets to major basketball game, then polled the students to see how much they thought the tickets were worth. Okay. The empty-handed students estimated around 170, whereas जिनके पास था winning students uh, uh, were not ready to sell more than 2400. मतलब average they were charging 2400. The simple fact of ownership makes us add zeros to the selling price. समझ में आया? दैट्स द थिंग. जैसे इन्होंने सम एक्सपेरिमेंट एक एक्सपेरिमेंट किया, उसमें टिकट्स दे दिया किसी बच्चों को. कुछ बच्चों को नहीं मिला, कुछ को मिला. ठीक है. तो जिनको नहीं मिला दे वर सेइंग कि इसका वर्थ केवल $170 है, बट जिनको मिल गया वो उसका वर्थ ज़्यादा लगा रहे थे. तो वैसा चीज़ है कि हम लोग किसी चीज़ का ओनरशिप आ जाता है तो हम लोग उस पर ज़्यादा ज़ीरोज़ लगा के ज़्यादा चार्ज करना चाहते हैं. इन रियल इस्टेट ऑल्सो इंडोमेंट इफेक्ट इज पैल्पेबल. रियल इस्टेट में सिंपल सा बात है कि अगर वी आर ओनिंग अ हाउस तो हम लोग अपना हाउस का वैल्यू हमेशा ज़्यादा ही ज़्यादा चाहेंगे. हम लोग कभी कम नहीं चाहेंगे, बिकॉज उसमें सेंटिमेंटल वैल्यू एंड बहुत सारे चीज़ होता है. तो इन रियल estate, endowment effect is palpable. Sellers become emotionally attached to their houses and thus systematically overestimate their value. They bark at the market price, expecting buyers to pay more, which is completely absurd since this access is little more than sentimental value. ठीक है. Richard Thaler performed an interesting classroom experiment at Cornell University to measure the endowment effect. He distributed coffee mugs to half of the students and told them they could either take the mug home or sell it at a price they could specify. The other of the students who didn't get a mug were asked how much they would be willing to pay for a mug. Okay. In other words, Thaler set up a market for coffee mugs. One would expect that roughly 50% of the students would be willing to trade to either sell or buy a mug, but the result was much lower than that. Why? Because the average owner would not sell below 5.25 and the buyer would not pay more than 2.25 for a mug. We can safely say that we are better at collecting things than at casting them off. Not only does this explain why we fill our homes with junk, but also why lovers of stamps, watches, and pieces of art uh, part with them so seldomly. Amazing. The endowment effect affects not only possession but also our own, but also near ownership. Auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's thrive on this. A person who bids until the end of the auction gets the feeling that the object is practically theirs, thus increasing its value. The would-be owner is suddenly willing to pay much more than planned, and my any withdrawal from the bidding is perceived as a loss, which defies all logic. In large auctions such as those for mining rights or mobile radio frequencies, we often observe the winner's curse. Here, the successful bidder turns out to be economic loser when he gets caught up in the fervor and overbids. I will offer more insight on the winner's curse in chapter 35. There is a similar effect on the job market. If you are applying for a job and don't get a call back, you have every reason to be disappointed. However, if you make it to the final stages of the selection process and then receive a rejection, the disappointment can be much bigger. Irrationally, either you get the job or don't, nothing else should matter. राइट जॉब लेते वक्त भी अगर फर्स्ट स्टेज में बाहर हो जाते हो तो उतना बुरा नहीं लगता बट इफ़ यू गेट टू पार्टनर स्टेज देन यू गेट आउट तो वो चीज़ अच्छा नहीं लगता इन कंक्लूजन डोंट क्लिंग टू थिंग्स consider your property something that the universe whatever you believe this to be has bestowed to you temporary keep in mind that it can recoup this or more in the blink of an eye so in conclusion what we should do we should not cling on to things ठीक है मतलब ये मेरा है that way we should not cling on to things consider your property something that the universe has bestowed to you temporary okay not like think okay, everything that you have is yours it's permanent like that keep in mind that it can recoup this universe can take the things back from you in the blink of an eye so in that way always be there thank you